It's only complicated when they talk about it on TV. You don't need a degree in astrophysics to understand it. Eternity, that is. Once you accept there are multiple universes, you agree that the possibilities out there in space go on forever. And if there's an infinite number of possibilities, anything is possible, no matter how slim the odds. That means that somewhere out there in the blueness of forever, there is another universe just like ours, and whirling around inside that one, lots of stars which are just like our sun, with other planets going around them just like ours, and by an incredible series of coincidences, one of them has developed in virtually the same way as our own Earth, right down to the tiniest detail. Many times I'd wondered just how much there was to know. Many became a number that continued to grow, until I asked myself, what if there are extraterrestrial life forms living on these other Earths? And if there are things out there in the vast darkness of infinity, are they intelligent? Are they friendly? Do they eat, sleep, gamble, steal, drink? Do they love? Do they pray to a god? And of course, what would they look like? Here in the ocean of ours, there are fish that you could easily mistake for patches of sand or pieces of coral, until one of them skips right out from under your nose. Astrobiologists have told us that life doesn't have to consist of bipeds that move and breathe and smoke their cigarettes like we do, that the universe is a gigantic bell jar of possibility, where everything has a chance and the right to happen. So I never had any cut and dry theories regarding how life should look. I just had the feeling that one day life would surprise us. That someday an unfamiliar civilization will stop by to meet us, or we might accidentally bump into E.T. on some quiet back corridor in space. Being interested in science, I believed in the power of the eye in the sky, and the starman, and a myth, the story about the man with the name Pax, who loved and prayed, and then lost his lover, so set off to the end of the universe to try and find her. In the late 21st century, the most powerful and ambitious planet hunter was named after Pax. It set off from the Cape with its own giant eyeglass, seeking new worlds and life beyond our bubble. A challenge to find a planet that orbited a star similar to our own sun. This planet would ideally be about the third or fourth rock from its host star, orbiting once every 300 days or so, and floating around in a region without too much steam and without too much ice, that perfect spot we call the Goldilocks region. We are told that scientists have never discovered an organism capable of surviving without water, so Pax, guided by man's priority quest to find wet planets, began by taking a small snapshot in the Cygnus region of our own Milky Way. Suddenly, we are watching a million new suns. On the 5th of December, by photographing planets that blocked out of the light from their host star, in the same way that a moth blocks out the light from a candle, Pax found the first wet candidate, a planet in orbit of a G-type star once every 289 days. The temperature on this planet was similar to that of our own Earth, but it was 2.5 times bigger, more like a Jupiter or Neptune. Since the water was no different to ours and the gravity was about the same, Pax turned his telescope closer to the planet's surface and peered through the densely clouded gas. What he saw was an ecosystem living below the ocean. It was certainly a planet covered in water, but devoid of any solid ocean floor, a pearl without a home, a planet in all but substance, a water well set adrift in an empty sky. During the first 6 weeks of Pax's voyage, 7 new planets were found. In its first year, there were 700. They ranged in size from half as big as our Earth to several times the size of Jupiter. Some were our vision of hell, churning oceans of molten rock and mountains of bronze 7 times taller than anything on Earth. Blowtorch worlds with 2 mornings and 2 evenings, landscapes of double rainbows populated by the twisted and tall timbers of static tornadoes. On the other hand, there were planets small and close enough to the host star to be rocky with liquid water, mile-high mountains, deserts, colourful jungles, and quiet utopic wetlands. Astrobiologists were soon to confirm that the universe was alive with the type of planets where evolution had solved the common problems caused by the environment, and had converged on a solution that had seen 3 different species evolved in the same way. A member of the elephant family, a member of the bird family, and a fish had all developed the prickly spines and snout of a hedgehog. A place where the hunters and the hunted had driven evolution, and fierce giant rodents with the armoured shell of a military tank inhabited a world that had endured 20 ice ages in the last 1,000 years. A home to some of the greatest giants of them all, where colossal ice age leviathans swallowed 2 tons of animals a week, and a 30-foot high woolly mammoth stumbles around her kitchen sink's hovel. Places where vast verdant valleys and prairies roll out to the seas and mythical beings are commonplace. A land with a total of 3 million new species of insect and animals, each endowed with reason, and enough of them to repopulate every extinct creature on Earth. Now, the Western Equus, Noah's fabled waterhorse, lives in a land where Jonah's land whale grazes on airborne particle matter. Fan-like plants collect infrared light by spinning like whirling umbrellas. Yellow phosphorescent fish with a sting that could really spoil your holiday swim in a fusion of psychedelic colours. Green reptiles and mysterious golden amphibians that love with more passion and tenderness than any mammal. And they each have their own startling past, tales of triumph and disaster, and explode gloriously into busting colonies, and harmonise all together in cold blood. Each new planet that Pax discovered had its own unique mix of flora and fauna, its own fingerprint, its own DNA. The scientists continued to explore with increasing forensic scrutiny. Landing parties discovered towering walls and spires, and the ruins abandoned by ancient civilizations. And, just when we thought they couldn't find anything more incredible, they blew our mind. Scientists had discovered over 100 billion exoplanets. They had calculated that there were 1 million planets whose inhabitants were light years ahead of us, where they shifted shape and travelled around from dimension to dimension using the second power of quadratics. There were 1 million or so planets that were light years behind us, whose tribes still lived in the dark ages and played with fire while trying to work out how far their new invention, the wheel, might take them. There was a whole galaxy of planets that were at various stages of evolution, whose inhabitants were looking back at us whilst making the same bold statements. Stacked to the teeth with mathematical evidence, they were convinced that somewhere on one of those other planets they all had an exact double, that there was another one of them, in the same way that there is another you, and an infinite number of variations of them and you. Strange to say, statistics will have it, on these other planets, anything that could possibly happen to your other you will happen. It's perfectly true that on another planet right now there's another you, who's probably a rock and roll star leaning back, pressing gas through the winding lanes of a private island while listening to their own songs, power played on the radio with the tints fully closed because the paparazzi won't leave them alone. I'm clicking my fingers for you to wake up, because in the neighbouring galaxy your other you's music career didn't take off. They hit the bottle and will sing on street corners for metal money. It's all very sad. I should mention in passing that I was that guy, the one who had been drinking from a bottle and was about to sing on a street corner. I ran into a few problems and realised that I needed to change, and quickly. I have since found, as with all acts of initiative, there seems to be one elementary truth. The moment we absolutely commit ourselves to change, Providence moves too. All sorts of things seem to occur to help you. Things that would otherwise never have happened. All sorts of unexplained events and characters seem to turn up just to help things along. Very soon after my fall from grace, unfamiliar civilizations began firing powerful laser messages through their own giant telescopes to announce their existence. Fast bursts of signals that were being intercepted after a journey of 1,000 light years. Earth began receiving a constant flood of data, signals that were so unambiguously artificial they could only have come from faraway worlds. Communication experts more used to the workings on the Communications experts more used to working on the intelligence of chimpanzees and dolphins began trying to devise ways of decoding the messages to frame some kind of response. Others believed that a new level of code breaking was required, as the standard decipherment and decryption techniques used by the military and security agencies didn't seem to be helping much. The government put things into context by announcing that they still had extraterrestrial scripts and signals from antiquity that had remained undeciphered over 100 years. Still, they came, quick, bright flashes that lasted just milliseconds but gave out as much energy as the sun in a single day. The Paxian became very interested in one particular planetary system. This was similar in scale to our solar system and orbited the star HD 162826, 100 light-years from Earth in the constellation of Hercules, the star born from the same cloud of gas as our own Sun. It was noted that the first planet of the star was similar in appearance to our own Jupiter, being only slightly smaller and completing its eccentric orbit every 420 days. The project scientists had to double-check that what they were seeing was actually true. The big telescope blinked. Ground control ran a check on its coordinates and slewed its beady eye back in the planet's direction to confirm that the planet did indeed have liquid water on board. It certainly did. It had life in the sea, sky, and on land. It had a hot side where the planet's heat rose and a dark side where the heat sank back into the cold. A permanent wind system and a stable atmosphere, a climate, the type of weather you could forecast. And this new purple dot was in the region of 2 red dwarfs, so it was never quite sunset there. Every hour was a cocktail hour, a good spot for real estate, or so I thought, because when I looked closely, its formation of continents mirrored almost exactly that of our own. The hazy images of the planet sent back by Pax brought me right back to myself, and I found that once I'd made a start on trying to take the first steps on the journey to get there, the universe took her own steps to help me. And if you're prepared to listen, I will explain how. But first, I think that it's only fair that you should know a little bit more about me and the circumstances under which I became interested in the most recent news reports about this perfect getaway. London's spaceport has become the most popular Eurohub with 3,000 connections and 1 million people saying goodbye every day. The poster said, "The perfect getaway." The journey began on the 7:30 to Malvern, aboard Dignity, the Cygnus Flight 4657, a craft made of aerogel, so light they call it the flying smoke. The rubber buffers on the doors sent resounding thumps around the compartment, and once I was seated, a simulated female face appeared on the overhead screens to mouth out to the safety trail. Apparently, it's the first space tube of its kind to be powered by 2 huge Bryson fusion turbines. I was soon familiar with them. They ignited with a huge sigh. Their throbbing shook the compartment. To accurately determine the precise time of our launch, the pilot turned us a full 360 degrees on the transit circle, and there we sat, waiting, looking up towards the clock stars. There was no immediate sensation of moving, until the jolt as we moved rails, and everyone seemed to get it. The gates were open, and we could see the sky. Everyone looked at each other, and there was a cheery "Hello!" from the seat opposite, and ripples of emotion throughout the compartment, and the captain's voice, "Roger, Exaltation Base, we copy you on that. You got a whole bunch of happy people about to head for the heavens." It was soon followed by a boom, and a smooth ascension into the sky. The entire heavens began to whirl, the stars became streaks, and coalesced into a single glowing bow. The tube erupted. A man ruffled his son's hair, one man shook another man's hand, and on that morning, only a few seconds after the previous one, a different kind of missile started on its way to the stars. I remember so clearly sitting in the blackness, wishing I could light up a cigarette. The patches of green and crimson flashing by the window, little suspecting the meaning of the massive gleam from the tail, and how deeply it would imprint me into the fabric of time. When I looked around from behind my magazine, it was evident that quite a few people in the carriage knew each other, that they moved in the same circles, but whether they knew each other or not, they certainly accepted each other, because all of them seemed to belong to the same exclusive travel club. And any member of that club could always, by some subtle social alchemy, recognize a fellow member at a glance. Yes, they actually pointed and said to each other, "He is one of us. She is one of us." With the length of time it was taking to get a drink in my hand, it felt as though I would never be in the club. Then, after an eternity, the roar of the turbines died down to a low, drowsy whistle. The seatbelt lights went off, and the drinks trolley arrived. Einstein was right, you know. Time is a relative thing. In some ways, that first journey seems so very far away now, and yet still more real than trips I've taken to more distant places and times. When I began to exchange stories with another high-flying traveller, he asked me if I'd followed any of the early Mercury missions. He was so old, I think his pilot's license may have been signed by Orville Wright. It's extraordinary when you stop to think about it. Space travel is still young enough that even those of us who don't consider ourselves old yet can still reach back and touch, through as little as a single degree of separation, those legends who launched the rest of us into the skies. As we writhed around our seats with all the weightlessness, the guy the other side of me reached over with a sudden youthful fire and glee in his eyes, wanting to shake my hand. I can still remember his words. "This is the hand that shook the hand of Richard Branson." I was still shaking his hand when another powerful boom came over the compartment. "Oh yeah," he said with a slap-happy grin on his face. "They fitted new 3-part burners." We both laughed out loud as the tube powered up on energy and roared hard into space with an extra kick of acceleration. It's a vivid memory. How level the thing kept as it pulled up into a powerful climb. And then suddenly there was an audible bing. My ears popped, and the gravity was normal again. Times like that draw you into the moments where time and space blurs, shifts, and slips an entirely new lens of perspective in front of your eyes. Time-bending moments revolved around the tube's tailwind. I was really tripping the light fantastic, clutching my meagre possessions in a transparent bag, waiting for the sickness. With the earth a ball of blue marble behind, that was me, getting away from it all, travelling beyond the speed of love, squashing myself into the undimension, taking the whole continuity into a new and surreal direction, and about to experience an event equivalent only to the first contact with heaven itself. Or so I thought. I didn't expect to be flying with anyone special. I suppose I began writing down some of what was going on out of habit and nerves for the job interview. And then this one chap began pointing up above our heads, giving me a guided tour of his memories, even inviting some of his old flying chums to join in the fun. Soon there was a crowd of people swarming the group of old-time astronauts, the silver-suited Mercury 7, the Rolling Stones of the sky. Like New World superstars, skydivers, deep-sea explorers, or circus daredevils, those guys had been at test pilots, each one with a name stitched onto a jumpsuit. Wilson Shepard, Dick Carpenter, Scott Glenn, Dally Shearer, Wally Grayson, Alan Slayton, and Smithers Jones, the last Americans and one Englishman, riding the last Freedom rocket out of town, stopping off along the solar system. I'd never seen anything like those fellas, except perhaps in a cowboy movie. I was in the company of the regular riders. Stargazing on a clear, crisp winter's morning, far away from any yellow lights or civilization, is impressive no matter whose company you're in. But in my company that day, there are a few chaps who'd seen a little more than most, and knew a lot more about travelling than me, although at that time I hadn't appreciated what their preferred mode of transport had been. As we all gazed upward, Smithers-Jones pointed at one particular bright star stream, while announcing to the row of black bowler hats, "Hey, Wilson, look! There's the arm of Sagittarius!" Wilson nodded slowly, and spotting a fireball of his own, pointed over to the left of the canopy. "Look over there, globular cluster Mike 2-2 over there, the Swan." The game of cosmic top trumps continued between them as they pointed out even more obscure clusters, until finally I had to ask them what they were talking about. "Those are the stars that we steered by." "Steered by?" I asked, still not quite understanding what they meant. Smithers-Jones looked down at me from the stars with a slightly puzzled look. "To get to Mars," he said. Wilson and Smithers-Jones, I thought, of course! They were the astronauts who took the famous photo of Earthrise from the backside of Mars. Smithers-Jones was the last man to walk on its surface. The truth of how one would get to Mars, other than sheer rocket power, had never occurred to me. I probably looked a little dumbfounded when, in a very practical way, he pulled together some pieces of fruit from the table, and while his glasses swam around his head, he made a geometric map of the heavens that roamed around in front of my eyes. "For 2 hours, carry on straight until you see the reflection of nebula November Golf Charlie 7023 over here. Then take a left turn at the next junction and travel for 3 hours until you reach the Eta Carinae Nebula, and then wait for those green lights at the Pillars of Creation." He was giving me the directions to other planets, like you or I would give directions to a supermarket. But what really struck me was how familiar he was with the stars he was describing. "And follow the stream of stars until you see the left-hand trunk like the head of an eagle, and you're landing over there, the third rock on the left." I sank back into my seat and watched them pointing out interplanetary landmarks and distant bodies, with space-time bending outside the window, thinking that even Einstein, with all of his scientific formulas, might have trouble making out what I was seeing. I'm not sure if it mattered that much. I was just glad that something good was happening in my life.